My BF let his married best friend flirt shamelessly and demand emotional support 24/7. When I cried about feeling second place, he said, "I'm just being a good friend." Finally, I told him it was either her or me. Hey everyone. Wow, okay. Actually posting here feels incredibly weird. I've spent countless hours scrolling through this site, reading about every relationship dynamic under the sun, nodding along, sometimes cringing, often learning. Never thought I'd be the one typing out my own saga, but my head is spinning and honestly, I feel like I'm drowning in anxiety over the situation with my boyfriend and his best friend. Maybe getting it all out and hearing from unbiased strangers will help me see things clearer. Prepare yourselves. This might take a while. So let me introduce the key players. There's me, 28F, and my boyfriend, who I'll call Chris, 29M. We've been officially together for about 13 months now, but our story started a bit before that. We met online, maybe 2.5 years ago now, through a fairly niche online strategy game. You know the type. Requires teamwork, late night sessions, lots of voice chat. We were part of a larger group, a sort of online guild or clan, introduced by mutual friends within that circle. For the longest time, it was purely group interaction, friendly banter, strategizing about digital empires, nothing personal. He lived several states away, so it never even crossed my mind as a possibility. Gradually, though, Chris and I started chatting more one-on-one within the game's messaging system, usually debriefing after a session or just sharing funny memes. He was witty, smart, and surprisingly easy to talk to. Our online friendship grew slowly, organically, over maybe 6 or 8 months. We discovered shared interests beyond the game, a similar taste in slightly obscure indie music, a love for dark comedies, both being kind of nerdy about history documentaries. It was comfortable and fun, zero pressure because of the distance. Then, about a year and a half ago, something pretty amazing happened in my career. I was working in marketing, feeling a bit stuck, and suddenly, a senior role opened up in my company's headquarters. It was a major step up, more responsibility, better pay, the works. And the crazy part, the headquarters were located in a big city just about an hour's drive from where Chris lived. It felt like the universe was nudging me. I agonized over the decision for weeks. It meant leaving my friends and familiar surroundings. But the opportunity was too good to pass up, and the proximity to my online friend Chris felt like this unexpected, exciting bonus layer. So I packed up my life, signed a lease on a small apartment, and made the move. Chris and I had talked about meeting up once I got settled, purely as friends. We both acknowledged it might be weird meeting someone you only knew virtually, so we planned a low-key coffee. I remember being so nervous that day, wondering if the easy online chemistry would translate, but it did, instantly. The coffee turned into lunch, which turned into wandering around a park talking for hours. He was even better in person. Warm smile, engaging conversationalist, genuinely interested in hearing about my move and my new job. We started hanging out regularly as friends, exploring the city's museums, trying out different restaurants he knew, him showing me his favorite hiking trails just outside the city limits. It wasn't long, maybe a month or so of these friend dates, before we both admitted there was something more there. We had our first official kiss after a long walk along the riverfront one evening, and from there, it just blossomed. And truly, for the vast majority of the time since then, our relationship has been everything I could have hoped for. Chris is incredibly kind-hearted, patient, especially when I get stressed about work, and fiercely intelligent. He's ambitious in his own career. He works in software development, but also incredibly supportive of mine, always cheering my successes. We laugh constantly. We can spend hours debating silly philosophical questions, or just sit in comfortable silence reading our respective books. We built a life that felt intertwined, yet independent. We share a deep love for lazy Sunday mornings with good coffee and terrible reality TV. We took a weekend trip up the coast a few months ago, stayed in a tiny cabin, went hiking, cooked together. It felt so easy, so right. We've met each other's families. His lived nearby, mine flew out to visit, and everyone seemed to get along well. His mom even pulled me aside to say how happy she was to see Chris so content. We have our separate interests too, which I think is healthy. He's obsessed with restoring old motorcycles. His garage is his sanctuary, filled with tools I don't understand, and bike parts in various states of disassembly. He tries to explain it to me, the satisfaction of bringing an old machine back to life, and while I don't quite get the appeal of grease-stained hands, I love seeing him passionate about something. My me time usually involves yoga classes, attempting overly complicated baking recipes that often end in minor disasters, which Chris finds hilarious, or getting lost in a good novel for my book club. We respect that need for individual space. We've talked tentatively about the big picture, marriage, kids, someday far off, where we might want to live long-term. Our values align on almost everything important. We both want a partnership built on respect, trust, and shared adventures. We still live in our own apartments, mainly because our jobs are in opposite directions from that central city, making a single location tricky for daily commutes. But we maximize our time together. Every single weekend is spent together, alternating apartments, plus any holidays or days off we can sync up. Honestly, if you saw us out together, you'd just see a normal, happy, slightly goofy couple, deeply in love. And 99% of the time, that feels absolutely accurate. But then there's the 1%, the dark cloud, and its name is Hannah. Every time Chris mentions her, talks to her on the phone when I'm around, or forwards me a funny text from her, which happens less now, thankfully, a knot forms in my stomach. The air gets thick with with unspoken tension. My anxiety spikes. Please understand. I swear I'm not inherently jealous. I have guy friends. Chris has other female friends from work and hobbies, and it's never, ever been an issue. I trust him. Or rather, I trust his intentions. I genuinely believe he wouldn't consciously betray me. The problem isn't that Hannah is a woman. The problem is the history, the dynamic, the complete lack of boundaries, and Chris's baffling inability or unwillingness to see how inappropriate and damaging it is. Here's the backstory Chris gave me, pieced together over several conversations early on. He met Hannah about a year before he and I started talking online. They were part of the same local co-ed softball team or something similar, a casual hobby group. According to Chris, they hit it off immediately with intense banter. He described it as electric, tons of flirting, inside jokes heavy with innuendo, that constant hum of, will they or won't they? He admitted, quite openly back then, that he fell for her pretty hard. He thought she felt the same way, based on how she acted towards him. He was single, genuinely smitten, and starting to envision something real developing. The record scratch moment came when, after several months of this intense flirtation, Hannah casually mentioned her husband. And then, almost as an afterthought, her 2 young kids. Chris told me he was floored. Apparently, she'd never brought them up before, despite their frequent and often personal conversations. He said finding out she was married with a family instantly doused any romantic aspirations he had. He insisted he told her then and there that anything beyond friendship was impossible, that he respected marriage and wouldn't go near that line. I believe that part. But here's where it goes off the rails. He didn't stop the behavior. The intense emotional connection, the constant communication, the flirty banter, which he now frames as just their established way of talking, the role he played as her primary confidant, all of that continued, apparently unchanged. When I first gently probed this early in our relationship, asking if it felt weird to maintain that level of flirtatious intimacy with a married woman who he'd had feelings for, he gave his standard justification. He was single at the time they established that dynamic, she was the one who was married, and he knew he wouldn't cross a physical line. So what was the harm? He genuinely seemed to believe that as long as his intentions were platonic, post-discovery, the actions didn't matter. It was like he compartmentalized it completely. I remember feeling uneasy even then, thinking it showed a strange lack of judgment or empathy for her husband, but I was falling for Chris, and he was so reassuring about us, so I let it slide more than I should have. Then he met me, we fell in love, and the rest should have been history. But Hannah remained history and present. My issue isn't just the history, it's the ongoing reality. Chris acts like Hannah's personal emergency service, her emotional support, husband on demand. Her marriage to Mark, the husband who's apparently in international logistics and travels frequently for long stretches, is portrayed via Hannah's reports to Chris as perpetually teetering on the brink. They married young due to the first pregnancy, and according to Hannah, it's lacked passion and connection for years. Every marital spat, every perceived slight from Mark, every lonely evening when he's away, Chris gets the tearful phone call or rapid-fire texts, and he always answers. He drops what he's doing, whether it's spending time with me, working on his bike, or just relaxing to tend to her emotional needs. It goes way beyond just listening. I found out accidentally about the money thing. We were looking at his online banking together once, planning a budget for our weekend trip, and I saw a couple of recurring transfers labeled Hannah Help. When I asked, he got awkward and admitted he'd sent her money a few times when she was short before payday or when she complained Mark was being tight with finances. He insisted it wasn't much, maybe $100 or $150 here and there, and tried to brush it off as just helping a friend. But it felt weirdly intimate and secretive, especially since he hadn't mentioned it. Then there's the voice recording incident. He told me about this one himself, thinking it was just a funny, quirky anecdote. Apparently, during one of Mark's longer trips abroad last year, Hannah claimed she was having terrible insomnia and anxiety. She told Chris his voice was calming and asked if he could record himself talking about anything, his day, a story, whatever, so she could listen to it to fall asleep. And he did it. He recorded multiple long audio files on his phone and sent them to her via their messaging app. He seemed to think it was just a slightly eccentric act of kindness for a friend struggling. I remember just staring at him, speechless, trying to process how incredibly inappropriate that felt, how boundary crossing it was, but he didn't seem to grasp it at all. He's her sounding board for everything intimate she feels is lacking in her marriage. She complains to him about lack of affection, lack of sex, lack of appreciation from Mark. Chris listens patiently, offering sympathy and advice. And the creepiest part? Sometimes she apparently messages him saying she's feeling unattractive or down and asks him to cheer her up by flirting with her or telling her suggestive jokes like they used to. He admitted to me, when pressed hard during one argument, that he had done this occasionally early in our relationship, framing it as just jollying her along because she sounded so miserable. He claimed he'd stopped initiating it, but sometimes still responded vaguely if she pushed. He genuinely seemed to think this was a harmless way to maintain their unique friendship, compartmentalized from his feelings for me. Her reliance is absolute. Problems with her kids? Calls Chris. Disagreement with her sister? Calls Chris. Can't figure out a tech issue? Calls Chris. Needs validation that she's still attractive after Mark makes an offhand comment? Texts Chris. He's her go-to for emotional regulation, practical advice, validation, and apparently simulated intimacy. He seems to derive a significant sense of self-worth from being her indispensable white knight, the one person she can always count on.
Again, supporting friends is good, but Hannah actively weaponizes her connection with Chris against me and our relationship. She makes constant remarks, often thinly veiled as jokes, about her deep connection with him and her desire for him. She has said in my presence more than once, things along the lines of, "If Mark and I ever split, you know I'm coming for Chris OP's name." followed by a brittle laugh. Or she'll tell Chris while I'm standing right there how lucky I am because she saw his potential first. I can recall specific moments that still make my stomach churn. Last Christmas, Chris's family hosted a party, and some mutual friends, including Hannah, who apparently knows his family slightly from way back, were invited. Chris and I were standing talking to his aunt, and Hannah came over, looped her arm through Chris's other arm, leaned her head on his shoulder briefly, and sighed dramatically that she missed having him all to herself sometimes. Chris looked incredibly uncomfortable, gently detached himself, and quickly steered the conversation elsewhere, but he never actually told her it was inappropriate. Later that night, she cornered me by the drinks table and started talking about how tough marriage is, and how lucky Chris was to have found someone, for now, but that he needed someone who truly understood his sensitive side, like she did. I just mumbled something and walked away, feeling sick. Online gaming sessions became unbearable if she joined. Chris and I often played together on weekends we weren't physically together early on, or sometimes still do if we're having a quiet night in at our respective apartments. If Hannah signed on, she'd constantly interrupt our coordination with private jokes aimed at Chris, reminisce loudly about the good old days of their intense gaming partnership before I came along, and make passive-aggressive comments about my gameplay or my connection with Chris. One time she kept calling him by a cutesy, slightly intimate nickname I knew they'd used years ago. When I finally muted her in the chat, Chris later asked why, and I explained how uncomfortable and excluded she made me feel. He sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and said Hannah was just insecure and socially awkward sometimes, that she didn't mean harm, and I should try not to take her bait. He basically asked me to manage my reaction to her bad behavior. I have tried talking to Chris about this multiple times. I've explained, calmly at first, then with more frustration, how Hannah's actions feel disrespectful, deliberately undermining, and anxiety-provoking. I've told him her constant flirtatious comments and, if I were single pronouncements, feel less like jokes and more like active attempts to destabilize our relationship. Each time, he defaults to the same script. He loves me. He chose me. His romantic feelings for Hannah are long dead, since finding out she was married. He's just being a supportive friend to someone he cares about who is having a hard time. He reassures me I have nothing to worry about, that I'm being sensitive, that Hannah is harmless. He seems incapable of seeing the situation from my perspective, or from the perspective of basic relationship boundaries. I trust that he wouldn't physically cheat. I really, truly believe that. But the emotional intimacy he reserves for her, the way he prioritizes her needs, the secrets, like the money, the shared history he allows her to constantly invoke, it feels like a profound betrayal in itself. It's like there's a section of his emotional landscape cordoned off for her, a space I'm not allowed into, and that she actively guards. I don't trust him when he's interacting with her because his judgment seems compromised, and I don't trust her one single bit. Everything she does seems calculated to keep him enmeshed and to make me feel insecure. There was one particularly bad argument a few months ago after the Christmas party incident. I was upset and he got defensive. He threw out the line almost bitterly, asking if I just wanted him to cut her off completely, to just ghost his friend. The implication was clear, that I would be forcing him to be cruel, that I was being that controlling girlfriend. And shamefully, I flinched. I backed down. I said no, that wasn't what I wanted, because the societal narrative about the jealous girlfriend is so strong, and I desperately didn't want to be her. I tried again to explain it was about boundaries, about her behavior and his enabling of it. But the conversation fizzled out into reassurances from him and simmering resentment from me. He has, on rare occasions, made feeble attempts to deflect her when she's particularly blatant in front of me, a quick, awkward, "Okay, Hannah, anyway," before changing the subject, but it's inconsistent and weak. It feels like he's so used to her behavior, or so afraid of confronting her directly, that he just lets most of it wash over him, especially when it's just texts or calls between them, which feels like tacit approval. Is he naive? Is he conflict avoidant? Or does some part of him enjoy being the object of her fixation? I hate thinking that, but the question lingers. And Mark, the husband? He's away so much. It's the perfect setup for this kind of emotional affair to flourish. I'm almost certain he has no idea about the true nature and intensity of their connection. He probably thinks Chris is just the nice, helpful friend Hannah portrays him as. If he knew about the constant late-night calls, the intimate confessions, the flirting she demands, the voice notes, the money transfers, could any husband be okay with that? It feels like Chris is participating in a deception, not just against me, but against Mark too. Chris is, in so many ways, my person. The thought of losing him is devastating. He's the man I pictured building a life with, minus this one, enormous, glaring issue. But the Hannah situation is like a cancer in our relationship, slowly poisoning the trust and intimacy we've built. It makes me doubt everything. Are we strong enough to withstand this? Is his need to be her savior fundamentally incompatible with a healthy partnership with me? Am I destined to always feel like the third wheel in their weirdly codependent dynamic? The anxiety is becoming overwhelming. I have trouble sleeping sometimes, replaying incidents in my head, imagining conversations. I confided in my sister Eva about it a while back. She was furious on my behalf. She told me Chris wasn't being a friend. He was being an emotional crutch and enabling Hannah's disrespect, and that I needed to demand better for myself. My best friend, Maya, was more cautious, advising a direct, non-negotiable boundary-setting conversation, but acknowledging the risk it might blow up. Writing all this down, seeing the sheer volume of incidents and inappropriate behavior laid out makes it painfully clear. I can't keep living like this. I can't keep swallowing my anxiety and discomfort to avoid being labeled controlling. My feelings are valid. The situation is unacceptable. I need to have a real conversation with Chris, lay all my cards on the table, and set a firm boundary. It feels terrifying because it might mean the end of us. But staying in this situation, feeling constantly undermined and anxious, isn't sustainable either. It's likely going to come down to him choosing a healthy relationship with me or maintaining this toxic, boundary-less connection with Hannah. I need to prepare myself for either outcome. This weekend, we need to talk, properly. No more backing down. Update 1. Okay, so the talk happened. It was Saturday evening. It was draining, exhausting, and probably the hardest conversation I've ever had. But we had it. Thank you truly to everyone who commented or sent messages after my original rambling post. Knowing I wasn't crazy, that my feelings were justified, gave me the strength I desperately needed to see this through without backing down. I asked Chris on Friday if we could set aside Saturday evening, turn off our phones, and just talk, really talk, about the Hannah situation. He agreed immediately, though his expression was apprehensive. He knew this wasn't going to be a casual chat. I spent most of Saturday mentally preparing, going over my points, trying to anchor myself in the knowledge that my needs mattered, regardless of how he might react. We sat down on the sofa in my apartment after dinner. I started by telling him how much I loved him and valued our relationship, but that the situation with Hannah had become unbearable and was causing me significant pain and anxiety. I then, calmly but firmly, laid out everything I'd been feeling and observing. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't soften the message either. I described specific incidents, the Christmas party comments, the gaming session interruptions, the if I were single remarks, the voice notes, the money transfers, the constant late-night calls he took. I explained why these things were hurtful. They felt disrespectful to me. They undermined our relationship. They blurred boundaries. They made me feel insecure and secondary. I explicitly used the term emotional affair, explaining that even without physical infidelity, the level of intimacy, reliance, and secrecy involved felt like a profound betrayal of the trust a partnership requires. I told him it felt like he was allowing her to claim a part of him that should belong to our relationship. I emphasized how her behavior was actively hostile towards me, and how his failure to establish firm boundaries felt like he was choosing her comfort over my well-being and the health of our relationship. I told him I felt he was consistently naive about her motives and the impact of his actions. His initial reaction was, as predicted, defensive. He brought up her troubled marriage, his long history with her, his inherent desire to help people in need. He mentioned his parents' difficult divorce again, suggesting maybe it made him hypersensitive to others' pain and overly responsible for fixing it. He initially pushed back hard on the emotional affair label, insisting his intentions were purely platonic now, that he was just being a supportive friend. He tried to argue that I was misinterpreting Hannah's awkward social cues and that she didn't mean to be malicious. He repeated that he loved me, that meeting me changed everything regarding any past feelings for her. But I didn't back down this time. Every time he offered a justification, I gently but persistently steered it back to the impact on me and our relationship. I didn't argue about his intentions. I focused on the consequences of his actions. When he said he was just being supportive, I asked if supporting one friend should come at the cost of hurting his partner. When he mentioned her troubled marriage, I pointed out that his constant rescuing was likely preventing her from addressing those issues authentically with her husband or seeking professional help. When he downplayed her comments, I recounted them verbatim and asked him how he would feel if one of my male friends spoke about me that way in front of him. Slowly, painstakingly slowly, something seemed to break through. His defensiveness started to crumble. He stopped arguing and started listening. When I described the feeling of hearing his muffled voice on the phone with her late at night while I was lying next to him, he flinched. When I detailed how her comments at the Christmas party made me feel small and temporary, he looked genuinely ashamed. He eventually admitted he hadn't fully considered the situation from my perspective. He conceded that continuing the old patterns of communication, even passively receiving the flirting, was inappropriate and disrespectful given our relationship. He acknowledged that providing that level of constant, intimate emotional support, especially the parts kept secret, like the money, crossed a line. He finally, reluctantly, agreed that it fit the description of an emotional affair, even if that wasn't his conscious intent. He swore again, looking me straight in the eye, that nothing physical had ever happened or ever would, and that his romantic feelings were truly gone, but he understood why I felt betrayed by the emotional intimacy he'd allowed. After a long silence, he looked utterly defeated and asked me, his voice low, what I needed him to do. This was the moment. Taking another deep breath, I told him clearly and unequivocally. I needed him to cut Hannah out of his life. Completely. No contact, no exceptions, no gradual fade out. I explained that I couldn't heal, and we couldn't rebuild trust, as long as she remained a presence in his life, testing boundaries and pulling focus. I told him I needed to know without a shadow of a doubt that he was prioritizing us. I said I couldn't be in a relationship where I constantly felt I was competing for my partner's emotional energy and loyalty with another woman, especially one who actively disrespected me. I reiterated that this wasn't about controlling him. It was about needing a safe and respectful relationship, and her presence made that impossible. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, just looking at his hands. Then he nodded slowly. He said he understood. He said he would do it. He told me he would end all contact. He did say, his voice thick with emotion, that it would be incredibly hard, that it felt like abandoning a friend who relied on him. My stomach tightened, but I held my ground. I reminded him gently that the dynamic wasn't just friendship. It was unhealthy codependency built on blurred lines and disrespect. I told him true friends don't sabotage their friends' relationships, and that ultimately, he wasn't truly helping her by enabling her avoidance of her own life problems. He seemed to absorb this, nodding again, though he looked miserable. He promised he would send her a final message, stating his need to cease contact out of respect for his relationship, and then block her everywhere.
The conversation then shifted, surprisingly, to broader issues. We talked for almost another hour about trust, about his fear of abandonment stemming from his childhood, about my own insecurities from past relationships. It was raw and painful, but it felt necessary, like lancing a boil. So, where does that leave us? We're still together. He says he's committed to proving he can be the partner I need him to be. He seemed genuinely remorseful and understanding by the end. The immediate aftermath felt fragile. We were emotionally exhausted. The next morning was a bit awkward, but he showed me later that day that he had sent the message and blocked her number and social media profiles. Seeing that tangible action helped. But words and even initial actions are one thing. Consistent behavior is another. Time will tell if he sticks to this. I feel an immense sense of relief at having finally spoken my truth and set the boundary, but it's overlaid with a layer of apprehension. I'm cautiously hopeful, but also guarding my heart. It feels like we've performed major surgery on our relationship. Now we wait to see if the patient recovers. Update 2. It's been about 3 months since that incredibly difficult conversation, the one I mentally refer to as the Hannah reckoning. I wanted to share an update, as I know how much reading others' experiences helped me. The short version? Things are surprisingly calm and stable, dare I say good. Chris, to his credit, has been true to his word regarding no contact. From everything I can see and sense, Hannah is out of the picture. He told me about sending that final message, brief, firm, stating his need to prioritize our relationship and cease communication, and then immediately blocking her everywhere. He said it felt like ripping off a Band-Aid, painful in the moment, but necessary. He hasn't mentioned her Dudong-di, and there have been no suspicious texts or calls. The cloud of tension that used to descend whenever her name was mentioned is gone, and the difference is palpable. He did admit, maybe a few weeks after the talk, that he occasionally felt a strange mix of guilt and emptiness. Not missing her romantically, he insisted, but missing the role he played as her rescuer. He said it was weirdly addictive, feeling needed to that intense degree, and he recognized how unhealthy that was. He also acknowledged feeling a bit adrift without the constant drama alerts from her, realizing how much headspace it had occupied. We talked it through, focusing on how that energy could be better spent on our relationship, his hobbies, his own well-being, and healthier friendships. He started spending more time in his garage working on his motorcycle restoration project, which seems like a much more productive outlet for his focus. We had one minor test about a month ago. Chris got an email from Ben, one of the mutual friends from their old hobby group days, forwarding some group announcement. Annoyingly, Ben hadn't BCC'd the list, and Hannah's email address was visible in the to field, Chris showed me the email immediately. He said his stomach dropped for a second seeing her name, but then he just felt nothing, except annoyance at Ben's lack of email etiquette. He replied only to Ben about the actual announcement and then deleted the thread. He didn't feel any urge to engage further or even think about it much. His transparency in showing me right away and his calm reaction felt like a significant step in rebuilding trust. We also heard indirectly, through Sarah, the mutual friend I mentioned before, that Hannah had apparently been complaining to others about Chris abandoning her during a difficult time presumably being her baseline state. Sarah mentioned Hannah seemed quite bitter, but hadn't tried to push Sarah into relaying messages again after Chris shut that down initially. Hearing this just solidified our feeling that cutting contact was the right move. It seemed Hannah's narrative was entirely self-serving, with no acknowledgement of her own boundary-crossing behavior. The most significant change, though, has been in us. Our communication has improved dramatically. Having ripped off the Band-Aid on the Hannah issue seemed to make it easier to talk about other, smaller things. We had a disagreement a few weeks ago about weekend plans. Nothing major, just conflicting ideas. In the past, it might have escalated into defensiveness or passive aggression. This time, we actually sat down, listened to each other's perspectives, acknowledged the other's feelings, even using some "I feel X when Y happens" language we discussed trying after the big talk, and found a compromise relatively easily. It felt like a breakthrough. The relationship just feels lighter, more joyful. We laugh more easily. We connect more deeply. We spend our weekends enjoying each other's company, hiking, cooking together. I'm still a disaster. He's still amused. Exploring little towns nearby, having marathon movie nights, without that undercurrent of anxiety or the looming possibility of a Hannah-related interruption. It feels like our relationship, not a triangle. Is the trust fully restored? Maybe not 100% yet. Deep wounds take time to heal, but it's getting there. Chris's consistent actions, his transparency, his willingness to discuss his own patterns, like the need for validation through rescuing, and his focus on us are all rebuilding that foundation, brick by brick. The cautious optimism I felt after the talk is growing stronger. It feels like we face the biggest threat to our relationship, and at least for now, we've come through it. Update 3. Hi everyone. It's been a full year now since the Hannah reckoning, and it feels like a lifetime ago in some ways. I thought I'd post what is hopefully the final update on this saga, reflecting on the journey and where we are now. First things first. Hannah remains firmly out of the picture. Chris has maintained absolute no contact, and there have been 0 attempts from her side to breach that, at least none that we're aware of. The silence on that front has been complete. We occasionally hear tiny tidbits about her through the grapevine, usually vague mentions of ongoing marital strife or dramatic situations, but it barely registers anymore. It's like listening to news about a stranger. There's no emotional charge, no anxiety spike. It just serves as a distant reminder of the bullet we dodged and reinforces that Chris's entanglement was enabling, not helping. The most important news is that Chris and I are thriving. That year has been transformative for us. Rebuilding trust wasn't instantaneous. It was a gradual process built on consistency, honesty, and a lot of intentional effort from both sides. Chris continued to be transparent, not just about the Hannah situation, which became a non-issue, but about everything. He made a conscious effort to understand his white knight tendencies and find healthier outlets. He's heavily involved in that community bike project now, mentoring teenagers, and gets immense satisfaction from it. He still supports friends and family, but there's a clear line. He offers help, he doesn't take ownership of their problems, and he certainly doesn't sacrifice our relationship's peace for it. Seeing him maintain healthy boundaries universally has been the most healing thing for my trust in him. Our communication continued to improve. Those couples counseling sessions we tried were surprisingly beneficial. They gave us practical tools for navigating conflict, understanding each other's attachment styles. Apparently, we both had some anxious leanings, surprise, surprise, and expressing needs clearly. We learned how to have difficult conversations without them devolving into defensiveness or shutting down. It feels like we have a shared toolkit now for relationship maintenance. The biggest leap? 6 months ago, we moved in together. After endless logistical calculations, debates about commute times, we found a place that's a slightly longer but manageable drive for both of us. And navigating the delightful process of merging 2 households worth of stuff into one apartment, we took the plunge. It felt like the natural next step. And honestly, it's been wonderful. Learning to share space, negotiating chores, still a work in progress. Building routines together. Simply knowing we come home to the same place every night. It has deepened our intimacy and partnership in ways I couldn't have imagined a year ago. We had our first proper housewarming party a couple of months back, filled with our friends, celebrating our life together, and it felt incredibly symbolic. There were no ghosts at this feast. Looking back at the person I was when I wrote that first post, riddled with anxiety, doubting myself, afraid to demand respect, it feels like a different person. Going through that ordeal, confronting the issue head-on, and choosing to prioritize my own well-being was terrifying but empowering. Chris stepping up, doing the hard work of self-reflection and change, and consistently choosing us has been incredible to witness and experience. Our relationship isn't just repaired, it's fundamentally stronger, more resilient, and more authentic than it was before. We can now talk about long-term plans, serious discussions about finances, career goals, even where we might want to travel next year, with a sense of shared purpose and security that simply wasn't possible when the Hannah situation was consuming so much oxygen. It was a hard, painful road, but it led us here, to a place of genuine trust, deep love, and quiet stability. For anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, tangled up with a partner's inappropriate friendship, please trust your instincts. Your feelings are valid. Setting boundaries is not being controlling. It's essential for a healthy relationship. It might force a crisis, it might lead to an ending, but it might also clear the path for something far better, either with your partner stepping up or on your own. Don't settle for feeling like a guest star in your own relationship. Thank you all, again, for listening and offering perspective way back when. It made more difference than you know. We're happy, we're solid, and we're looking forward to building our future together.